Mansfield Park. Mansfield Park.
Chapter 1. Lady Bertram's Family. Lady Bertram had made an excellent marriage. Although her family did not have a lot of money, she had been lucky enough to marry a wealthy man with a title. She now lived with her husband, Sir Thomas, and their 4 children at Mansfield Park, their beautiful home near the small town of Northampton, about 150 miles north of London. Their elder son, Tom, was 17 years old, and would one day inherit Mansfield Park, although he was not a very serious or responsible young man. The second son, Edmund, was 16 years old, and it had already been decided that he would become a clergyman. Sir Thomas and Lady Bertram also had 2 daughters, Maria, who was 13, and Julia, who was 12. Lady Bertram had a very comfortable life, with very little to do except spoil her 4 children, whom she loved dearly. Lady Bertram also had 2 sisters, who had not been lucky enough to make as good a marriage as she had. The first sister, Mrs. Norris, had married a clergyman with very little money of his own, and she and her husband had had no children. The second sister, Mrs. Price, had made an even worse marriage. Against the wishes of her family, she had married a sailor with no money and no education, and had gone to live in Portsmouth, on the south coast of England, far away from her sisters. She was too proud to ask her sisters for help, and for many years she had had very little contact with them. Mrs. Norris's husband was now dead, and Mrs. Norris lived in the village near Mansfield Park, in a small house which had been given to her by Sir Thomas. However, she spent much of her time at her sister's house, where she could enjoy the luxury which she didn't have at home. Mrs. Norris interfered a great deal in the Bertram family's life, giving orders to the servants and always offering advice, even when it wasn't wanted. She had persuaded herself that she was very useful to the family, and the family allowed her to believe this. And in fact, Mrs. Norris did play an important part in the life of the Bertram family. Although she had little to do with her nephews, Tom and Edmund, who were at boarding school much of the time, she had a great influence on her nieces, Maria and Julia, who stayed at home and studied with a governess. They were attractive and intelligent girls, and they liked their aunt, who spoiled them and constantly told them how wonderful they were. Because of their aunt, they grew up to be very self-confident and not at all timid. They had a very high opinion of themselves and of their place in society, and were confident that they would make good marriages. Lady Bertram also liked her sister's presence at Mansfield Park. Lady Bertram was a rather lazy woman, and thanks to Mrs. Norris, she didn't have to worry about domestic matters or her daughter's education. It was obvious that Mrs. Norris loved Maria and Julia, and that was enough for Lady Bertram. Sir Thomas, who was a member of Parliament, and often had to go to London, was also satisfied with the situation, and saw no reason to change it. His wife was content, and he was happy to see his daughters growing up to be educated and polite. Chapter 2. The Offer. One day, to everyone's great surprise, a letter arrived at Mansfield Park from Lady Bertram's sister, Mrs. Price. Lady Bertram read the letter to her husband and Mrs. Norris. My dear sister, I am now so desperate that I must write to you, as I don't know what to do. Our situation is very bad. We have no money. It's becoming more and more difficult to buy clothes and food for our 8 children. And I'm expecting our 9th child very soon. Our eldest child, William, is now 10, and he's a fine boy. Perhaps when he's older, he may be useful to Sir Thomas. I see now that my behavior in the past was very wrong, and I hope you will forgive me. If you could find a way to help me and my family, I would be very grateful. Your loving sister, Emma. We must forgive her, said Mrs. Norris immediately. She has behaved badly, but she is our sister, and we must help her. Lady Bertram and Sir Thomas agreed. Sir Thomas sent friendly advice to Mrs. Price, and Lady Bertram sent money and clothes for the baby. Mrs. Norris's contribution was to write the accompanying letters. A year passed in this way, with Lady Bertram, Sir Thomas, and Mrs. Norris sending money and writing letters to Mrs. Price. One day, Mrs. Norris said, "I'm constantly thinking about our poor sister Emma and her family. I know we've helped them a lot in the past, but I think we should do more. I'd like to invite one of Emma's children to come and stay with us. It will be one less child for Emma to worry about and feed. Let's offer to take Fanny. We can give her much more care and attention than her poor mother can give her." Fanny was Mrs. Price's eldest daughter and was then 10 years old. Lady Bertram agreed immediately, but Sir Thomas hesitated. "We must think about this carefully," he said. "It might be cruel instead of kind to take the girl from her family." Finally, however, Mrs. Norris convinced Sir Thomas of all the advantages Fanny would have if they brought her to live with them. "Thank you, Sir Thomas," said Mrs. Norris. "I will never love Fanny as much as I love your own 2 daughters, but I would hate myself if I didn't help her. After all, she is my sister's child, and although I am poor, I would prefer to do without the necessities of life than be ungenerous to Fanny. If you agree, I'll write to my sister tomorrow and make the preparations for Fanny's journey to Mansfield Park." Having agreed that they should invite Fanny to Mansfield Park, Sir Thomas decided that he would do everything he could to take good care of the little girl. He wanted to make the arrangements for Fanny's journey as pleasant as possible and to help her be comfortable in her new home. Mrs. Norris also had a feeling of satisfaction. "After all," she thought, "I suggested the plan." The fact that her plan would cause no trouble or expense to herself didn't stop her from believing that she was the most generous aunt in the world. The next day, as Mrs. Norris sat down to write the letter to Mrs. Price, she heard Lady Bertram ask, "Who will Fanny come to first, sister? To you or to us?" "It's impossible for Fanny to come and live with me," replied Mrs. Norris. "You know that I don't have much money, and that it would be very difficult for me." Sir Thomas was rather surprised to hear this, because he had thought that Fanny would be company for Mrs. Norris. Lady Bertram, however, said calmly, "Then she'd better come to us." Sir Thomas was silent for a few moments, and then said, "Yes, her home will be in this house. At least she'll have companions her own age, and regular lessons." "Very true," cried Mrs. Norris. "I wish I could be more useful, but I'll do everything possible to help. I hope Fanny will understand how lucky she is." "I wonder what the best way is for Maria and Julia to treat Fanny," said Sir Thomas. "They must be friendly, but Fanny must never believe that she is their equal. It would be unfair to give her false hopes. She must not think that one day she will make as good a marriage as our daughters." "You're right, of course," said Mrs. Norris. "It's a delicate matter, but together I'm sure we will manage. And now I'll write the letter to our sister." When she received the letter, Mrs. Price was rather surprised that her sisters were offering to take a girl instead of one of her sons. But she accepted the offer with gratitude. Soon afterwards, all the preparations for Fanny's journey to Mansfield Park were complete. Chapter 3. Fanny's arrival at Mansfield Park. Fanny completed her long journey safely. She was met in Northampton by Mrs. Norris, who felt very important at being the one to welcome her and introduce her to her relatives at Mansfield Park. Fanny was small for her age and very timid, but she had a pretty face and a sweet voice. Seeing how timid she was, Sir Thomas tried to welcome her, but he was a rather frightening-looking man, and Fanny was immediately afraid of him. Tom and Edmund, who were home at the time, were tall for their age and seemed like men to their little cousin, and Maria and Julia were full of confidence. Fanny was extremely unhappy, afraid of everybody, ashamed of herself, and missing terribly the home she had left. Fanny could hardly look up or speak without crying. On the journey from Northampton, Mrs. Norris had told her repeatedly how lucky she was, and that she must be very grateful and well behaved. All this, and her tiredness after such a long journey, made Fanny feel even unhappier, and she couldn't stop crying until finally she went to bed. "This isn't a very good beginning," said Mrs. Norris when Fanny had left the room, "but it's only natural that Fanny is missing her family. She'll soon feel more comfortable." It took a long time, however, for Fanny to feel more comfortable. The magnificence of Mansfield Park frightened her. She wasn't used to such big rooms, and she was always scared that she would break something. She was frightened of everything and everybody. Lady Bertram was too lazy to make much effort to speak to her, and Maria and Julia were surprised that she was so timid and uneducated. They soon lost interest in her and paid very little attention to her. Every night in her little room, Fanny cried herself to sleep, but she didn't show her unhappiness to the family. One morning, a week after her arrival, her cousin Edmund found Fanny crying at the foot of the stairs. "What's the matter, Fanny?" Edmund said kindly. "Are you ill? Is somebody angry with you? Don't you understand your lessons?" For a long time Fanny wouldn't answer, until finally Edmund asked her about her home, and Fanny started to cry even more. "You're missing your family, my dear little Fanny, and that shows that you're a good girl," Edmund said. "But you must remember that you're with relatives who love you very much and want to make you happy. Let's go for a walk in the garden, and you can tell me all about your brothers and sisters." Edmund soon found out that it was her brother William that Fanny talked about most. William was a year older than Fanny, and her mother's favorite son. He was Fanny's constant friend and companion, and she missed him terribly. "I promised to write to him," Fanny explained, "but I don't have any paper, and I don't like to ask for some." "If that's the problem, I'll give you everything you need to write your letter," said Edmund. "Let's go and do it now." They went to the study, where Edmund helped Fanny write her letter. When she had finished it, he also wrote a few words to William, and even put a little money in the envelope for him. Afterwards, they sat and talked, and Edmund began to find his cousin interesting, and to understand her better. From that day on, Fanny felt more comfortable at Mansfield Park. She felt that she had a friend, and Edmund's kindness to her made her happier with the rest of the family. The house began to be less strange, and the people less frightening. The other Bertram children didn't intend to be unkind to the little girl. Tom, aware of his importance as the eldest son, was only interested in himself. When he was at home, he sometimes teased Fanny or gave her a small present, but apart from that, he didn't take much interest in her. The two girls, Maria and Julia, couldn't understand their cousin's ignorance, and often spoke about it to their mother and aunt. Lady Bertram only smiled at her clever daughters, but Mrs. Norris took every opportunity of telling her nieces how superior they were, and reminding Fanny of her inferiority. For a long time, Fanny had very little contact with her own family, though she thought of them often and received news of them with interest. Sir Thomas's continued kindness to them gave her great satisfaction. Her uncle paid for her brother's education, and when they left school, he helped to find them suitable positions at work. Edmund and Fanny spent as much time together as possible, even after Edmund left to study at the university. He was always kind to her and tried to bring out her good qualities, and he gave her advice, encouragement, and consolation. Edmund helped her with her lessons, encouraged her to read books, and discussed ideas with her. Fanny loved Edmund more than anyone else in the world except William. She divided her love between the two of them. Chapter 4. Maria's Engagement. The years passed, and when Fanny was 16, Sir Thomas had to travel to Antigua, in the West Indies, where he had business interests. He expected to be away from home for about a year, because it was a long way to Antigua, and there would be a lot to do when he got there. He decided to take his son Tom with him, and give the young man the opportunity to learn the business. At the same time, it would keep Tom away from certain young people that Sir Thomas thought were having a bad influence on his son. Sir Thomas wasn't happy about being away from the family for so long. Maria and Julia were growing up and needed their father to guide them. However, he was confident that Mrs. Norris and Edmund would make sure that his daughters behaved as they should. Edmund had now completed his studies and was waiting for a clergyman's position to become available in the neighborhood. In the meantime, he was home helping his father. Sir Thomas had learned to trust Edmund's judgment and sense of responsibility. "I know you'll take good care of my dear daughters while I'm away," he said to Mrs. Norris and Edmund with a smile. It was fortunate for Sir Thomas that he didn't know how Maria and Julia felt about his journey. He had no idea that his daughters thought that he was strict and old-fashioned. Maria and Julia liked to enjoy themselves, and sometimes their father's disapproval of what they were doing spoiled their fun. They weren't at all sorry to see him go. As for Fanny, she wished that she could be sorry about her uncle's journey, but she was relieved that he was going away. She knew it was wrong to feel this way, and although she was grateful to Sir Thomas for all his kindness and generosity, she had not yet learned to love him. It was hard for her to feel affection for someone she found very difficult to talk to. Lady Bertram, however, was unhappy that Sir Thomas was going away. This wasn't because of the possible difficulties or dangers of her husband's journey, but because of her own selfishness. At home, when his business didn't occupy him, Sir Thomas was always ready to be her companion and carry out her wishes. "I'll miss you, my dear," she said to her husband. "I know, and I'll return as quickly as possible," he replied. "Our children will be your companions while I'm away. Edmund will look after my business affairs in England, and will take care of the family, the house, and the servants. There will be nothing for you to worry about." Sir Thomas and Tom set off on their long journey, and many weeks later, the family finally received news that they had arrived safely in Antigua. Edmund took care of everything just as his father would have wished. Maria and Julia were now at an age to want husbands. The girls were very popular with the young men they met at balls and parties, and no one doubted that they would soon make excellent marriages. Lady Bertram was much too lazy to look for suitable husbands for her daughters. She was perfectly happy to give this responsibility to her sister, and Mrs. Norris was delighted to accept. It made her feel useful and important. While Mrs. Norris went to parties and balls, Sir Thomas and Tom set off on their long journey, and many weeks later, the family finally received news that they had arrived safely in Antigua. Edmund took care of everything just as his father would have wished. Maria and Julia were now at an age to want husbands. The girls were very popular with the young men they met at balls and parties, and no one doubted that they would soon make excellent marriages. Lady Bertram was much too lazy to look for suitable husbands for her daughters. She was perfectly happy to give this responsibility to her sister, and Mrs. Norris was delighted to accept. It made her feel useful and important. While Mrs. Norris went to parties and balls with her nieces, Lady Bertram was happy to stay at home with Fanny. "It's so pleasant to sit here quietly by the fire," she said. "We don't want to go to noisy parties, do we, Fanny? It will be quite enough to hear all about them afterwards." Fanny had no desire to go to the parties, but she enjoyed hearing how her cousins had spent the evening. Maria and Julia were good at describing the young men they had danced with, the food that had been served, and the ladies' dresses. Among the gentlemen that Maria and Julia met was a Mr. Rushworth. He was a very ordinary young man, but extremely wealthy. When he began looking for a wife, it didn't take him long to decide that the beautiful Maria Bertram would be perfect. He soon persuaded himself that he was in love with her, and his mother approved of his choice. Maria was now nearly 19. She wanted to be married and have an elegant home of her own. Moreover, her father would no longer be able to tell her what to do. She decided to accept Mr. Rushworth's offer of marriage. "Mr. Rushworth comes from a good, respectable family," she said. "He'll be a very suitable husband. He has a house in London and a magnificent home in the country. We'll be very comfortable, and you must all come and visit me." Mrs. Norris agreed with her niece. "My dear sister," she said to Lady Bertram, "this is wonderful news. It will be an excellent thing for Maria to marry a rich man from a well-known family." Edmund, however, didn't agree with his aunt. "Maria's a bright, intelligent girl, and will quickly be bored by Rushworth," he told Mrs. Norris. "It's a mistake for Maria to marry him only because he's rich." He also tried to warn Maria. "If Rushworth didn't have so much money, he would be very stupid indeed," Edmund told her, but he couldn't persuade her to change her mind. In spite of Edmund's objections, the marriage was agreed upon. A letter was written to Sir Thomas, telling him the happy news, and asking him to give his permission for the marriage. Sir Thomas wrote back at once giving his consent. "I'm happy to hear that my daughter is marrying a gentleman from such a respectable family," he wrote. "I only ask that the wedding not take place until I return home." Unfortunately, just as Sir Thomas and Tom were about to set off on their journey, there were some new problems in the business. Sir Thomas had no choice but to postpone his return home, but it wasn't necessary for Tom to stay any longer in Antigua. "Tom, you must go home at once, and I'll follow as soon as I can," Sir Thomas said to his son. "Tell your dear mother that I'm well and that there's nothing to worry about. And don't forget to give everyone my most affectionate greetings." A few days later, Tom set off for England. He had worked hard in Antigua. Now he looked forward to being with the family and spending time with his friends. Chapter 5. The Crawfords' Arrival. While Sir Thomas was still away in Antigua, changes took place in the neighborhood which affected the young people at Mansfield Park. Henry and Mary Crawford came to live with their half-sister, Mrs. Grant, and her husband, Dr. Grant, the clergyman in the local church. The Grants lived a short walk from Mansfield Park and were very friendly with the Bertrams. The two families met regularly but didn't usually eat together. Sir Thomas preferred quiet meals with his family. In his absence, however, it was different, and the young people looked forward to inviting each other to dinner often. "It'll be very enjoyable to have dinner with the Grants," said Julia to Maria, "and I'm looking forward to meeting Mary and Henry Crawford. Mrs. Grant says they're charming. I'm sure we'll like them." Mary and Henry were the children of Mrs. Grant's mother and her second husband. Mrs. Grant had married and left home while Mary and Henry were still children. Not long after that, their mother died, and Mary and Henry went to live with their uncle and aunt, Admiral and Mrs. Crawford. Admiral and Mrs. Crawford had a comfortable home and were kind to the young people. Unfortunately, though, the Admiral wasn't a moral man, and he and his wife weren't happy together. It was a poor example of marriage for the young people growing up in their home. Mary and Henry learned all about the pleasures of living in a wealthy home, but they didn't learn correct values. When Mrs. Crawford died, it was no longer suitable for Mary and Henry to live in the Admiral's house. Dr. and Mrs. Grant had no children of their own, and they were happy to offer Mary and Henry a home. They enjoyed the company of bright young people, and Mrs. Grant dreamed of helping Mary and Henry make good marriages. She planned to introduce them to suitable families in the neighborhood, and she told them all about their neighbors at Mansfield Park. "The Bertrams are a fine family," she said. "I'm sure that you'll like them. I've always found the eldest son, Tom, very charming and polite, and of course he'll inherit the property one day. Perhaps Mary will marry Tom, and Henry will choose one of the daughters. But we won't talk about that yet. We'll be happy to meet such a respectable family. I'm sure it will be a great pleasure. Don't you agree, Henry?" said Mary to her brother. "I'm always happy to meet attractive young ladies," answered Henry with a laugh. In the meantime, the young Bertrams were busy making plans to meet the Crawfords and get to know them. "We must visit our new neighbors as soon as possible," said Maria. "It's the correct thing to do, and our father would certainly approve." "Let's invite the Grants and the Crawfords to dinner," suggested Julia. Their mother approved of the idea, and it was decided that they would visit the Grants the next day and invite them to dinner at Mansfield Park. When the young Bertrams and Crawfords met, they were very pleased with each other, and soon the two families were spending many happy days together. Although Mary had heard excellent things about Tom Bertram from Mrs. Grant, she was soon disappointed when she met him. Tom wasn't serious about anything, not even about Mary herself. She quickly lost interest in him and began to pay more attention to Edmund, who thought she was charming and attractive. He hadn't yet discovered that her values were very different from his. When Edmund discovered that Mary liked to ride but didn't have a horse, he asked Fanny for help. Fanny had her own horse and went riding every day. "Fanny," said Edmund, "I know that you only ride for a short time each day. Mary doesn't have a horse, but she likes riding as much as I do. Would you lend her your horse for a few hours every day so that we can go riding together? We'll return in plenty of time for you to go riding yourself." Fanny was jealous of Edmund's friendship with Mary, and was unhappy about them being together so much, but she couldn't refuse. Unfortunately, Edmund and Mary sometimes enjoyed their rides so much that they didn't notice how long they had been out. By the time Edmund returned the horse to Fanny, it was too late for her to go riding. It hurt Fanny very much that Edmund could forget his promises to her so easily. He seemed much more interested in his new friend than in her, but she didn't say anything to him. Although she was present when the two families met, Fanny was too timid to take part in their conversations. She preferred to sit quietly and watch the young people around her. She saw how friendly Maria and Julia were with Henry Crawford, and didn't think it right that Maria smiled so much at Henry. It wasn't suitable behavior for a young woman who was engaged to be married. Julia didn't like it either, but for another reason. She wanted Henry to look only at her, not at her sister. She spoke to Edmund about it. "Edmund," said Julia, "our new neighbor Henry is a charming, friendly young man. But you must tell Maria not to smile at him so much. He may misunderstand and think she's attracted to him. Perhaps he doesn't know that she's engaged to Mr. Rushworth." "Don't worry, Julia," said Edmund. "I'm sure Henry will just think that Maria is being friendly. However, I'll tell him about her engagement to Mr. Rushworth, in case he doesn't already know." Chapter 6. Home Theatricals. Some time after Tom's arrival home, his good friend Yates arrived for a visit, just when the young Bertrams and Crawfords were looking for something new to occupy them. Yates loved home theatricals, and the young people were delighted with the idea. Mrs. Norris was happy to see the young people enjoying themselves, and didn't realize that Sir Thomas would think that play acting was unsuitable for his daughters. He didn't approve of public demonstrations of emotions, even in a play. Edmund knew that his father would disapprove of the theatricals, and tried hard to stop them, but the others wouldn't listen. They needed Fanny to join them and play one of the parts, but she absolutely refused. "You're a very ungrateful girl, Fanny," said Mrs. Norris. "How can you refuse to help your cousins, after all they've done for you?" Her unkind words made Fanny unhappy, but nobody could persuade her to change her mind. Everyone wanted to start the rehearsals for the play, but there was still one male part to fill. "We must find one more actor for our play," said Tom to his sisters. "Let's invite one of our friends. Who do you think would be the most suitable?" "Wait," said Edmund. "We mustn't invite anyone else. Our father wouldn't like it. I'll have to play the part myself." Everyone was delighted with his decision except Fanny. She understood why Edmund had agreed to act, but she was sorry to see him do something he believed was wrong. The play acting brought all the young people together for many hours each day. Sometimes they argued or felt jealous because one of them had a more important part to play than the other. Edmund and Mary still enjoyed being together, but they sometimes argued too. Mary didn't like Edmund's plan to become a clergyman. She wanted him to have a profession where he could become rich or famous, but Edmund wasn't interested in wealth or fame. He forgave Mary for having opinions which were different from his. He didn't see her faults and only blamed Admiral and Mrs. Crawford for not teaching her better values. Mr. Rushworth, who had also been invited to participate, was unhappy. He enjoyed the play acting, but wasn't at all pleased to see his future wife together so much with Henry. Julia was even unhappier about the situation, especially as Henry was quite happy to flirt with her as well as Maria. Fanny observed them all and was miserable. She hoped they would soon become bored with the theatricals, and that the play acting would finish before her uncle returned. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. Sir Thomas arrived home unexpectedly early, and he was very angry to find out about the theatricals. "Theatricals are not at all suitable for young ladies and gentlemen. They must stop at once," he said. "I'm surprised and disappointed, Edmund, that you allowed this. It's not what I expected when I asked you to look after your sisters." "I apologize, Father. It was wrong of me to allow the theatricals," said Edmund. "Fanny was the only one who behaved correctly. She wouldn't agree to take any part in the play. We should have followed her example." Fanny felt sorry for her cousin, but she was grateful that he didn't forget to mention her own behavior. Chapter 7. Disappointments and Surprises. With the return of Sir Thomas, there were no more invitations to dinner between the two families. Fanny didn't mind. She would have been quite happy not to see the Grants or Henry and Mary any more. But Mary was bored and wanted company, so she tried to become friends with Fanny. She knew this would please Edmund, and would also give her the opportunity to see him. Fanny was polite, but it was difficult for her to like Mary. Their opinions were so different, especially when they spoke of Edmund and his future career. Henry didn't enjoy visiting Mansfield Park now because there was no more play acting, and the situation with Maria was uncomfortable. Although they were attracted to each other, Henry wasn't ready to marry yet. He also didn't love Maria enough to suggest that she marry him instead of Rushworth. He decided it would be a good time to go and visit his uncle, Admiral Crawford, in London. Maria, however, was sure that Henry loved her, and she dreamed of marrying him instead of Mr. Rushworth. Maria waited each day for a letter or some sign of love from Henry, but none came. Finally, she understood that Henry didn't want to marry her. Julia and Maria were both unhappy. Julia was angry and miserable that Henry showed no interest in her, and Maria was too proud to let anyone know how much Henry had hurt her. She hid her disappointment and decided to marry Mr. Rushworth after all. By now, Sir Thomas had gotten to know Rushworth better and was disappointed in the young man. He asked Maria if she was sure she wanted to marry him, but she assured him that she was happy with her decision. "I can see that you're determined to marry Mr. Rushworth, Maria," said Sir Thomas, "and so I agree to the marriage, although I don't think Mr. Rushworth will be a suitable husband for you at all." The wedding took place and was a very elegant affair. After the wedding, the young couple left for Rushworth's country home. When they left Mansfield Park, Maria invited Julia to join them. Now that there was no longer any competition between them, the sisters had become friends again. "Please come with me, Julia," said Maria. "I know you'll be better company than Mr. Rushworth." Mrs. Norris watched the young couple with satisfaction. She felt very proud of herself for helping to arrange a marriage between her niece and a wealthy man from a well-known family. After the Rushworths and Julia had left, it was very quiet at Mansfield Park. "There will be no more balls and parties to go to now," said Mrs. Norris with a sigh. "And there's certainly no need for Sir Thomas to hold a ball for Fanny. She has been given a good home at Mansfield Park, and that's enough." But not everyone shared Mrs. Norris's low opinion of Fanny. Julia and Maria's departure had left a gap, and Fanny became more useful to the family than she had been before. "It's very fortunate that Fanny's here," said Sir Thomas to his wife. "She's a pleasant companion for us. Now that Maria and Julia have gone, she joins in the conversation more. I like to hear what she has to say." The Grants also enjoyed Fanny's company and sent her an invitation to dinner, although they had never done so when her cousins Maria and Julia were still at home. "My dear," Sir Thomas said to Fanny, "what time should I order the carriage to take you to the Grants'?" "That's very kind of you, Uncle," Fanny answered, "but it isn't very far to the Grants' house, and I can easily walk." "No, Fanny, there's no need for you to walk," Sir Thomas said firmly. "You'll go in our carriage. That's what I always did for Maria and Julia when they were invited out to dinner." Mrs. Norris was horrified to see Sir Thomas treat Fanny as if she were one of his daughters. But Edmund was delighted. His cousin had changed. The timid little girl, who had come to Mansfield Park years before, had become a confident, attractive young woman. Edmund wasn't at all surprised that the Grants now enjoyed Fanny's company, and invited her to have dinner with them. Chapter 8. Henry surprises himself. Henry returned from London and was amazed to see how attractive Fanny had become. Although he had never noticed her before, he now decided to amuse himself by making Fanny fall in love with him. He talked to her often and asked her opinions about all kinds of things. He constantly told her how nice she looked. It made Fanny feel very uncomfortable. She didn't like Henry very much, but it was difficult to avoid him without being impolite. Fortunately for Fanny, She soon had an excellent excuse to escape from Henry's attentions. William, her favorite brother, now a sailor, came for a visit on his way to join his ship. It was years since Fanny had seen any of the family, and she and William had a wonderful time together. "It's my ambition to become a lieutenant one day," William told her, "but I don't know if it will ever be possible." "I wish I knew of some way to help you," said his sister. "Never mind, Fanny," said William. "Don't think of it any more. Let's enjoy the short time we have together." Sir Thomas watched the two young people with pleasure. He had become very fond of Fanny, and he was also happy to see that his nephew was such a fine young man. He decided to hold a ball for them on the last evening of William's visit. Only one thing spoiled Fanny's happiness about the ball. William had given her a pretty cross, which she very much wanted to wear to the ball, but she had no chain for it. "I have several chains," Mary said when Fanny told her the problem. "Please take this one to wear with your cross. My brother Henry gave me the chain. You must think of him whenever you wear it." It isn't right for Mary to give away a present she got from her brother, thought Fanny. But she didn't want to appear ungrateful, and after some persuasion, she accepted the chain. On the day of the ball, Fanny had a wonderful surprise. Edmund gave her a beautiful chain he had ordered especially from London, and she very much wanted to wear it to the ball. But now she had two chains, and didn't know which one to choose. "Oh dear," Fanny thought. "What should I do? Nothing would make me happier than to wear Edmund's chain with William's cross. They're the two people I love most in the whole world. But Mary might be insulted if I don't wear the chain she gave me." She thought about the problem all day and finally solved it by wearing both chains. At the ball, Henry danced several times with Fanny and watched jealously when other young men danced with her. Fanny looked so lovely, and she was so sweet and modest. She was quite different from the other women Henry had been attracted to. He began to realize he was actually falling in love with Fanny, and that it was no longer a game. His greatest wish was that she would return that love. The day after the ball, William's stay at Mansfield Park came to an end. The family was sorry to see him go, because everyone had enjoyed his pleasant personality and the exciting stories he told of his life at sea. Fanny missed him most of all, and prayed for his happiness. "I hope William will soon get the promotion he deserves," she said to her uncle. "I'm sure he will," replied her uncle, and added kindly, "He's a fine young man, and he must come and visit us again whenever he's in England." Fanny was grateful to her uncle. It made her less miserable about William's departure. Edmund, too, was planning to leave Mansfield Park. He had been invited to the home of a good friend near London. Although Fanny would miss her cousin, she was relieved that there would be no danger of him seeing Mary Crawford for some time. Before he left, Edmund confided in Fanny. "I'm so unhappy, Fanny," he said. "I love Mary, but I doubt now that I can marry her. Her views about life are too different from my own, and she wouldn't enjoy being a clergyman's wife." Fanny comforted Edmund and told him how sorry she was, but secretly she wasn't sorry at all. She only hoped that he would soon forget Mary Crawford. Mary was also unhappy. She had learned to love and respect Edmund and believed that he shared those feelings. Unfortunately, she had lost Edmund's good opinion of her when she criticized his plans for becoming a clergyman. She desperately wanted to speak to Edmund and try to make him love her again. It worried her that he might fall in love with someone else before she got the opportunity to talk to him. She decided to speak to Fanny. Knowing that Fanny and Edmund were good friends, she imagined that Edmund would have told Fanny all about the family he was planning to visit. "I know that the friend Edmund is visiting has several sisters," she said to Fanny one day. "Are they pleasant girls? Do you think Edmund might want to marry one of them?" "I don't expect such a thing to happen," Fanny replied quietly. Her words gave Mary some consolation, and she felt even more hopeful when Henry returned from London and told his sister his plans. He spoke enthusiastically to her of his love for Fanny and his intention of marrying her. Mary quickly understood that such a marriage had advantages for herself. The Crawford and the Bertram families would meet often, and there would be many opportunities to speak to Edmund. "There's no need to tell Henry my true feelings," she said to herself. "It's enough for him to know that his marriage to Fanny will make me very happy." To Henry she said, "I'll welcome Fanny as a sister, and I promise to love her very much. Fanny will be very lucky to have you as a husband, and I'm sure her family will be very pleased. But I'm a little worried about Maria Rushworth and Mrs. Norris. Maria once wanted to marry you herself. She has always considered her poor cousin Fanny inferior, and she'll be very angry when she discovers that you love Fanny more than you love her. And Mrs. Norris will think that it's a great insult to her dear niece Maria." "Maria will soon forget her anger," answered Henry. "And it's time that she and the family at Mansfield Park stopped thinking of Fanny as a poor cousin. When she is my wife, Fanny will be respected as she deserves." Chapter 9. The Departure. Once Henry had decided that Fanny would be the perfect wife for him, he became a very determined admirer. He visited Mansfield Park often, complimenting Fanny on her appearance whenever he saw her, and paying her a great deal of attention. He was so much in love that he couldn't believe that Fanny didn't feel the same about him. Fanny had always been reserved about showing her emotions. When she didn't react to his compliments, he thought she was just being modest. Fanny neither liked nor admired Henry. She had a low opinion of his principles, and had been disgusted with the way Henry had flirted with Maria and Julia during the play acting with Yates. She spoke to him as little as she could without seeming impolite. However, when she discovered that Henry, with the help of his uncle Admiral Crawford, had arranged for her brother William to become a lieutenant, her gratitude made her speak to him more warmly than usual. "It was extremely kind of you to help William get his promotion," she said. "I can't thank you enough." But it was not kindness that had made Henry help William. He had only done it to get Fanny's gratitude, and he was delighted that his plan had succeeded. He thought the warmth of Fanny's words meant that she loved him. Sir Thomas was pleased to see Henry's interest in his niece. He knew nothing of Fanny's low opinion of Henry, because Fanny had been careful not to talk of the way Henry had behaved with Maria and Julia during the theatricals. As a result, Sir Thomas had no reason to think badly of him. He discussed Henry's interest in Fanny with his wife. "Fanny has become a charming young lady," he said. "I've always hoped that she would marry a fine gentleman, and this is a wonderful opportunity for her." "You're right, Sir Thomas. Fanny is very lucky," answered Lady Bertram. "If we hadn't brought her to live with us and educated her as a lady, a fine gentleman like Henry Crawford would never have wanted to marry her. I'm happy for Fanny, but I'll miss her when she leaves us." There was no need for Lady Bertram to worry. Fanny wasn't about to leave Mansfield Park. When Henry asked her to marry him, she refused him politely, and all his efforts to make her change her mind were useless. Fanny knew how disappointed her aunt and uncle would be, and she was sorry about this, but she was determined not to marry a man she didn't love. Edmund was the only person in the world that Fanny loved enough to marry. When Edmund returned to Mansfield Park, and heard that Fanny had refused Henry's offer of marriage, he was surprised. But he, like his mother and father, accepted her decision. All three cared too much for Fanny to persuade her to marry someone against her wishes. Henry, however, was very disappointed. He had been confident of making Fanny fall in love with him, and he left Mansfield Park, hurt and angry. Soon after that, he went off to London to visit some of his old friends. They would be happy to see him and would help him forget Fanny. Sir Thomas accepted Fanny's decision, although he found her behavior difficult to understand. He thought a girl from a poor family should be happy to accept the offer of a good marriage. Perhaps Fanny would be more grateful if she could see what it was like to live in a poor home. But he didn't say this to his niece. Instead, he made a suggestion. "Fanny, my dear," he said to his niece one evening, "it's been a very long time since you saw your parents and your brothers and sisters. Would you like to visit them?" "Oh, thank you, Uncle," Fanny said happily. "It would be wonderful to see my family again. But I wouldn't like to leave my Aunt Bertram if she needs me." Sir Thomas promised her there would be no difficulty. "Write to your mother and ask her when you can come and visit them," he said with a smile. As soon as Mrs. Price's reply came, saying how happy she would be to see her eldest daughter again, Sir Thomas made the arrangements for the visit. Fanny was happy and excited. The visit to Portsmouth would be a relief as well as a pleasure. She felt uncomfortable at Mansfield Park, knowing how disappointed Mary Crawford and the Bertram family were that she had refused to marry Henry. By the time she returned, it would all be forgotten. For 2 months, she wouldn't have to pretend to be sorry that Edmund wasn't going to marry Mary. And in addition, she would see her family and spend time with William, who would also be home from sea. William came to Mansfield Park to accompany Fanny on the journey. Their uncle gave them the money to pay for the coach, and the two young people looked forward to a comfortable and pleasant journey together. The day before they left, however, something happened that nearly destroyed their pleasure. Mrs. Norris decided to join them. "I haven't seen my dear sister for many years," said their aunt, "and my sister will be surprised if I don't take this opportunity to come and spend a few days with her." The two young people were horrified. They didn't want to spend the journey with Mrs. Norris. They wanted to have time together on their own. Fortunately, however, Mrs. Norris didn't like spending her own money. When she realized that she would have to pay for the return journey herself, she quickly changed her mind about going to Portsmouth. "I must sacrifice my own pleasure," she explained. "It would be wrong to leave you, Sir Thomas, and my dear sister, when you need me. My first duty is at Mansfield Park." Fanny and William were very relieved and left for Portsmouth feeling very happy. Chapter 10. The Return Home. The long journey passed quickly and pleasantly. William told Fanny that he was looking forward to returning to his ship, this time as a lieutenant. "Oh, Fanny, just think of it," he said. "I'll have more responsibility, and I'll be earning much more money, too. I'll save some of my pay, and one day I'll buy a little house for you and me to live in." It gave Fanny great pleasure to see William so excited and to hear him talk about his ship and his dreams. He was in a happy, light-hearted mood, and he made her laugh and smile with amusing stories of life aboard ship. She was content to listen and be entertained. William would have liked to talk about Henry Crawford, the man who had helped him get his promotion and who was responsible for his present happiness. He didn't understand why his sister Fanny felt so cold toward Henry. But William was young and romantic and believed in love, so he was ready to accept Fanny's explanation that she couldn't marry a man she didn't love. He was careful not to mention Henry when he talked to Fanny, because he knew it upset her. Fanny didn't want to think about Henry Crawford at all, but she hadn't been allowed to forget either him or his sister Mary. When Henry left Mansfield Park, Mary also went away to stay with a friend in London, but she wrote regularly to Fanny. In every letter, she wrote of Henry and his feelings for Fanny, and she described the disappointed young ladies in London who had hoped to make Henry Crawford fall in love with them. Each time Mary wrote, Henry added a few lines to his sister's letter with warm words for Fanny. He still dreamed that one day Fanny would return his love. "I hope Mary will soon get tired of writing to me," Fanny said to herself with a sigh. "Then I will be safe from Henry and his messages of love." After 2 days of travel, William and Fanny arrived in Portsmouth. Fanny's heart was beating loudly as the coach passed through the familiar streets of her childhood. As they got nearer the house where she had spent the first 10 years of her life, she found herself thinking about her family. It was more than 8 years since she had left them, and her younger brothers and sisters must have changed a great deal in that time. A sister, Betsy, had been born 5 years before, and another sister, Sarah, had become ill and died a few years after Fanny left home. But the Prices were Fanny's real family, and she desperately wanted to get to know them again. She wanted to love them and be loved by all of them. But she didn't know what her brothers and sisters felt about her. They probably didn't remember her very well, and were no longer interested in their sister. They might even be jealous of her because she had been living in a rich home for the last 8 years. She felt more confident about her mother. "My mother's feelings won't have changed," she thought. "It's natural for a mother to love her children." But then she thought sadly, "I don't suppose it will make much difference to my father. He never seemed very interested in my sisters or me." She turned to her brother. "Oh, William, I've been away for such a long time, and so many things have changed," she said. "Sarah is dead, and I've never even met Betsy. I do hope our other brothers and sisters haven't forgotten me. Do you think they will love me and accept me as their sister?" "Dearest Fanny," answered her brother affectionately, "of course they will love you. It may take a little time. That's only natural, but very soon they will learn to love you as I do. Mother certainly loves you, and I'm sure she has always loved you, even when you were far away. But you mustn't be surprised if she's too busy to spend a lot of time with you. She has a lot to do, and our servants aren't as efficient as the servants at Mansfield Park. Mother doesn't seem to manage them very well." At that moment,